Hello folks, you are listening to PSN Radio. I'm Live Mike, and I'm joined by a very special guest today, Mr. William Binney. William Binney worked as a crypto-mathematician, a member of the World Geopolitical and Military Analysis Reporting Group, and a senior official of the NSA for nearly 40 years. Mr. Binney, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you very much for having me.
Great to have you here. It's an honor to have you here. Tell us, how did you get started in the intelligence community?
Actually, I really started simply by going into the United States Army back in 1965, and they did a battery of tests on me, and they said, you have a really good aptitude for analysis, and so they put me in intelligence. And as a result of that, I was introduced to SIGINT, and then from there I spent 4 years in the military, and then came into NSA for another 32 years of service there in signals intelligence.
Now, did you start out in Army Security Agency, or did you go CSS, or what branch?
Yeah, I was in the Army Security Agency. It later became INSCOM, Intelligence Command. In 1977, I think it was. So, but it was the Army Security Agency up until that time, 77.
My father worked with the ASA, by the way, approximately the same time you were, so it's funny. I'd be interested to know if you crossed paths. Anyway, now you worked as a traffic analyst, is that right?
Yeah, that's what I started out doing, yeah.
For those that don't know what that is, could you?
Well, yeah, okay. Traffic analysis is like looking at the communications, relationships and patterns of relationships, and seeing the structure of the communications network that you're looking at, and trying to infer what they're all about, or what they're intending to do simply by looking at how they interact over time. At
that time, you were part of a team that uncovered the NVA and VC military ops towards the end of the war in Vietnam. What were the lessons that you learned from the Tet offensive as far as the importance of intelligence gathering is concerned?
Well, I wasn't a part of the team, but I was watching it back here at NSA, and I was looking at it from the reporting coming in from the field in Vietnam. And it was clear to me that, an impending major offensive from the DMZ all the way down to the Delta was imminent. And it was also true for ASA units in Vietnam. They knew that too, and they all got prepared for it. Unfortunately, the rest of our military there did not do that. And so that's why they gained as much of a foothold in South Vietnam as they did in the Tet Offensive. Otherwise, if people would have paid attention to the intelligence, they would have stopped them cold. But they didn't. So the importance was, to me, it meant you had to try to make it understandable and clear and forceful enough to make leadership pay attention to the intelligence so they don't make mistakes like that again. But unfortunately, human nature being what it is, they continue to do that. So that's the human nature problem, I guess, we have.
Yeah. So you were 4 years in the military, and then you went directly into the NSA.
Well, I had to finish up school. I did that shortly, and and then very quickly after that, I went back into NSA because they wanted me in for the stuff that I'd been doing while I was in the Army. See, I was a very shy, withdrawn person, like an introvert, super introvert, I would call myself back then. But the Army changed me, thank goodness,
And you worked in operations in the NSA. What is operations? And how does that differ from a branch like research?
Well, I mean, it's like you've got they separated technology away from operations, and I thought that was a big mistake because they took it away from the meaningful work that was directed to solve problems. And it put it in an atmosphere like a university where and the technology part of it anyway. With technology is where you try to develop things that will aid you in solving problems in the future as well as right now. You try to project into the future and over the horizon and try to, like DARPA, the Defense Research Defense Research Group, they try to project things into the future. Well, so does research at NSA. So they are kind of in an academic environment, not really reacting to real-world events, whereas operations is more of you're on the line and you're responsible for reporting intelligence right now, like they should have reported the intelligence of the Russian preparations to send troops into Crimea, or it should have made it clear what was happening in Iraq or what was happening in Syria, all of that, or Libya even before it, So
operations is really where the rubber hits the road as far as direct contact with the geopolitical environment that we find ourselves in, and hopefully present information that would be able to give us an advantage, yes?
Yeah, and also perhaps even avoid conflicts, like, if you know in advance that someone's preparing for something, then you can prepare, and just your fact that you're preparing might dissuade them from actually taking that action, So it's a way of, if you have that kind of knowledge, it's a way of being able to deal with it before it happens. So you might change the intentions of the potential adversaries.
Given the fact that you were in NSA for close to 40 years, what was the culture like in the NSA? Would you say that it's money-oriented or mission goal-oriented?
Yeah, I had a conversation with a former group chief back in NSA just before I left. This was about 14 years ago. We were talking about the value system inside NSA when we joined NSA. That was back in the 60s. Why the value system was first and foremost was the mission, solve the mission and do the job. Next was your people, the people who worked for you, and the next was your organization, and then was yourself. You were last. And now the value system seems to be exactly the reverse. Self is first, organization to maintain and keep it feeding, and then your people, and then the mission. So the mission has moved to the bottom of the priority list of the value systems there. And the whole thing has shifted into money acquisition is the answer to our problem. Everything is solved by the budget, which again is the way that wastes and causes all kinds of fraud and corruption in the entire process, and the mission gets lost in that scenario.
One of the things that you did to try and correct that and try and to reform was the vision statements that you had. Could you talk about those? I remember you saying something like you had vision statements that you put out there, like everything all the time and aim high and do better.
That's it.
Yeah. How well were they received?
They weren't very well received at all. In fact, the research groups, their motto was to aim at something you could absolutely achieve, and don't really try to push the bubble too far because you might not make it. Well, I mean, that's like I ended up with I first started out with the understanding that their vision statement was aim low and miss, because that means you're not really pressing yourself, you're not really trying, you're not really doing your best. And that's really what the philosophy was at the time. But after a while, it became really pretty clear that it wasn't that. It was keep the problem going so the money keeps flowing. In other words, when you have all these contractors working for you, and they outsourced all of this work to the contractors, or a good deal of it. Well, I mean, the objective of those contractors is to get the next contract, not solve the problem. If you solve the problem, you don't have the problem to get money, so you can't get the next contract. So they have an incentive not to solve the problem, or just do little increments on it. Well, that was basically the philosophy of the technology people back in the 70s and 80s and 90s. So that was the same principle, was just applied now to a much, much larger industrial complex around NSA.
Essentially, there would be a benefit to lowering the bar of excellence, I guess you might say.
That's right.
Talk about the brilliant idea that you had of multi-country network that you set up. Talk about that.
Yes, it was. I kind of did it. I would say a bit under the table. I mean, it wasn't really. It wasn't under the table, but it wasn't up in where it could be fired at by a lot of managers who didn't want that kind of thing. So what I did was I basically came up with the concept of automation of a certain part of the intelligence process. And so I was using that as a kernel to try to draw other countries in to participate in it with me in this development, because then I would share everything with them, and they would join us and add comments or additions wherever they had or whatever they could add. They would contribute, and we would all advance together, as a unified group. So in other words, what it meant was I was leveraging all the resources of all the countries that joined, and they were leveraging our resources. We were all benefiting in all the ways we possibly could, because we were sharing understanding of how we could automate the process and how the process operated and how to structure it, and we all shared for the first time. We shared source code with our partners, and those partners then would have the ability to look at that code, try their own software, and try to merge it in and do development themselves. So it was a matter of sharing everything with them, so they could actually participate in the process.
So it's almost as though that you were pulling together the gifts and talents from a bunch of friendly nations, networking them to collaborate and for problem solving. Yes.
Yes, that's exactly right. And we did set up our separate network for that to happen too. The first time a network like that had ever been set up. So, yeah. It was like we had our own web running.
Let's talk about SARC. You assembled a multidisciplined group at the NSA, similar to a multi-country network. You did the same kind of notion at the NSA. You brought a more efficient team, everyone working toward finding the solution. Weren't there stumbling blocks set in place designed to compartmentalize your organization and keep everyone in their little box? I mean, what was that like for you trying to develop that?
Yeah, that was the exact structure that existed. What they did back in the early 60s, 50s, and 60s by NSA was organized where the technology people were mixed in with the operations people, so the operations people were describing the operational problem, and the technology people were right there. They could see it, interact with them as they tried to deal with it, So it was really a kind of a incremental spiral type developments that they would do to solve those kinds of problems, which are really the optimal kind of things. I think that's basically what they did in a Saturn plant and things like that. So, but in the late 60s, early 70s, that's when they separated the two and split them apart again, and that's when the shift started from shifting from mission priority to money acquisition priority. And so that also meant for managers they could break down the problem into all kinds of little boxes and subdivide that. And the more boxes you had, the bigger manager you were, the higher up in the ranks you went, and so on. So there was a vested interest in creating many little boxes. And when they did that, they would put all these people, any individual would be in one box, and maybe throughout a career they might move to one or two more boxes, but that's about it. So they would never get to see the entire enterprise and how it all fit together. So you really couldn't get the ideas of how to solve problems and leverage it across your entire enterprise. So that's what that's what the putting people in boxes really does. It destroys that picture and understanding of what you're really all about.
Your plan really allows for a holistic view of everything to try and attack the problem for solutions.
That's right. Yeah, see, when Dr. John Taggart came over to me in operations, I was in operations, he was in research, and he said, gee, let's get together and see if we can't do something like a Skunk Works. And I said, that sounds great to me. So he brought all the technology talents like engineers and computer scientists and some physicists. We had access to physics and physicists and other kinds of theoretical mathematicians in the research group, whereas over on our side, on the operations side, we had the crypto-mathematicians and some other, I was a mathematician also, so, and we had the linguists and analysts and all kinds of technical support to implement things in the operations area. So when you bring all those talents together in one place, which is what we did in the SIGINT Automation Research Center, why everybody, when you stated a problem, you did it to everybody with all the talents that would be involved in solving it. So they all knew their part. By doing that, they all knew their part in the program you were trying to develop. They all knew what the objective was, and they all knew how everybody else fit together to make that happen. So it gave everybody that overall understanding to where they could understand what their entire job was and how it fit into the enterprise. that was unique in NSA because it used to be that way back in the 50s and 60s, but then they destroyed that, and we recreated that in the SARC, and it worked really well.
Well, I'm sure they're listening to our conversation presently, and hopefully somebody in the higher-ups will get this message. And so this was really out-of-the-box thinking from yourself and others in that small group of, I guess it was 16 highly gifted people.
Yep. And more than half of them were contractors that we'd hired, so we only really had a core of maybe 6 or 7 government personnel.
And this was at variance with the legacy approach. You didn't want to have anything to do with that. You wanted to just kind of break away from the way things had been going and, hey, let's try something different here.
Well, I try to put it pretty simply, like if you realize the state of your being in existence right now and it's not working, then there's something wrong. And the problem is the legacy systems that you've developed over time are the things that got you there. So obviously they're not working. So if you accept them as a part of your ongoing process and incorporate them, you're building in the limitation that got you to where you are. So that is not a good idea, especially if you want to do a lot better. So we took a clean slate approach. We said, scrap everything. None of it's working. So let's figure out the best way to do it from scratch on.
At some point at your time in NSA, they approached you. I don't know who it was, but who offered you $1.2 billion to solve this problem, whatever problem they were looking at. Can you explain that?
Sure. Well, we were developing a system that would manage massive amounts of information 24 hours a day as it was flowing by, and also pulling out things in a smart way that were relevant to problems that we were supposed to be working on, that is international terrorism, dope smuggling, militaries around the world, and governments, and so on. Those were the legitimate things to be monitoring in intelligence. And we were just basically filtering out right up front and never taking in data on individuals anywhere in the world, especially in the United States, because when it came to the United States, we had to protect their identities if they got pulled into that process. And they would only get pulled in, for example, if they had contact with someone who was a known target, a drug dealer or a terrorist or something like that. Then we would encrypt their attributes, and until you could show probable cause, you couldn't identify them. And once you showed probable cause, you could do the decrypt and identify them. So that process, we were putting that together, and it was running really pretty well. And at the time, this was back in '99. We had it running in '99 and 2000, and in that same time frame, Director Hayden of NSA created the NSA Transformation Office, and that was headed by a friend of mine that I knew, and he knew what we were doing down there and knew that it was running, and so he sent his deputy down and said, gee, as a part of this transformation, you guys have something that really helped with working, so if we gave you $1.2 billion, what could you do with that? And I said, well, we have to take a few days to figure that out, so we did. And then we went back to him and said, well, for if you give us $1.2 billion, we could upgrade the entire world, everything back here, and manage massive amounts of information anywhere in the world, and only select out what it was we really wanted our analysts to be looking at, and do it smartly. But as part of that process, we could only spend a little over $300 million. So
that's a savings of $900 million, folks.
Yeah, well, instead they spent over $4 billion on a Trailblazer program that did absolutely nothing except produce PowerPoints.
So now, so the program that you were working on was Thin Thread, and that was World Wide Web. That was the situation there, right? And
well, it was more than that. I mean, it would do that. It would also do the public switch telephone network, which was basically and any other kinds of information you wanted to put in. It was like a relationship builder. As in a generic sense, it's like A has a relationship to B. You don't care. It doesn't matter if A and B are the same or different, and it doesn't matter what the relationship is. So, for example, if they're the same, you could have an account number transfers money to another account. That's like bank transfers. or phone calls, A calls B, or emails A, emails B, or any kind of relationship like A lives at B, right? Any kind of relationship like that would build this what we call the graph, and that was what you would use to manage understanding of the data you were looking at as it passed by.
The program that you developed always sought to respect the constitutional protections. You never did anything that would have violated any law in any way, because whatever data that you were collecting on Americans, that data would automatically be encrypted if it was linked to being an American. Is that so?
Yes, and anything that was a U.S. to U.S. kind of relationship in phone calls, emails, or anything else would be absolutely suppressed, and we would never take it in. It would never be acquired right up front. That would be recognized and skipped over.
Wow. So, okay. So if it was an American to an American, you're not even going to deal with it. It's just not even going to make it.
It's gone. Right.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can make that decision fairly quickly right up front. That was not a problem for us. I mean, that was not difficult to do at all. Yeah. As they claim now it is, and that's just absolutely false, okay? I mean, that's how caller ID works, for example, on the phone network. I mean, you look at the caller numbers, you could tell if they're both American or not. It's right up front.
Your job, then, isn't to collect everything. Your job is to sift through all the data that's there to find the bad guys. You're trying to find connections. You're trying to find illegal activity going on for whatever reason. That's what you're trying to do. You're not trying to collect all the data. You're trying to look at all the data and analyze it in such a way that you can sift through it and funnel it down, right?
Yes, that's right. To pull out only relevant information to legitimate targets. And we keep in mind, we would not take in the data of individuals around the world unless they were affiliated with an organization that was doing something illegal or, like terrorism or dope smuggling or money laundering or things like that.
Now, a few minutes ago, you mentioned Trailblazer. There were billions of dollars thrown at this thing, and it turned out to be a dismal failure. What happened with that, and why didn't they take the wisdom and learning that you had with Thin Thread in your program? Why didn't they just take your fully functional program that respected the Constitution and respected Americans' privacy? Why did they go Trailblazer?
Okay, I basically felt that the decision they made was based simply on the fact that Thin Thread solved the problem, and if you solve the problem, you can't use the problem to justify getting more money, which meant you can't build an empire, you can't build an industrial complex around you, you can't get bigger, and so that basically was the decision they made. I've fundamentally say that they've traded the security of the people of the United States and the free world for money.
Corporate feasting off the NSA. This is the culture of corruption, sadly, that has affected certain people within the NSA.
Yeah, and what it's done, though, if you look over time, what the whole idea to justify acquisition of more money and a bigger budget and a greater workforce in terms of contractors as well as government employees was to do a bulk acquisition of data. Now, if you take in, tons and tons of data, you have to have large storage facilities for it, like Bluffdale or some down in San Antonio or Fort Gordon, Georgia, or here at Fort Meade, or around the world in various places. So you have to build up a storage capacity, and you have to hire more contractors to manage the data, and you have to hire more analysts to look at the data. And so the bulk acquisition adds so much more of a burden to you that justifies getting more and more money. But in the end, what it does is it buries your analysts, and the mission, keep in mind, was at the bottom now of the value system. The mission starts to fall apart because by burying your analysts, there's no way they could get to the data. I mean, the probabilities are so much against them of finding something unique and significant in that once you dump all this information on them day after day. So they begin to fail, so they don't find things that would give them an indication that the Russians are sending troops into Crimea or that Iraq's going to fall apart, or that or that he had the Boston bomber, or the Times Square bomber, or the Fort Hood shooter, or any of that. Even though you go back forensically and you can find all that data, that's a police job. That's not an intelligence job. They've lost sight of the mission. The mission is to produce intelligence and predictions of intentions and capabilities of potential enemies. That's what the intelligence objective is. That's not a forensics job.
Hear, hear.
That's a police issue.
Why did they bring in private contractors? Why are they outsourcing such sensitive work? I mean, is it a matter of freeing them from some legal responsibility? If the private contractor breaks the law, well, then I'm not implicated. I mean, is that what we're dealing with here? Or is it a matter of, I'm going to pay off my buddy that has this that's a private contractor. I'm trying to figure this out. I mean, you have all the PhDs in the planet, for God's sakes, working inside the NSA, and you're outsourcing. Why?
Well, I think part of the reason is what I refer to as an incestuous relationship. That is, people, as they leave NSA, go to these contractors and get hired at fairly high salaries, So it's a retirement benefit after you get out of NSA. Also, they hire contractors in to manage NSA programs, so you cycle back and forth between these contractors and the government service in NSA. It also happens in CIA and other agencies, so this is not unique to NSA. It's an incestuous relationship that they really should stop. I mean, you shouldn't be allowed to do this, because that's just the appearance of that is it appears as a conflict of interest right away. So I mean, it's not a matter of not having it, not having them understand that you can easily run into conflicts of interest and legal issues doing this, which is fundamentally what they're doing.
Talk about the SAIC placing essentially a gag order on you. I understand that your thin thread was working so well that someone went up to you and told you, what did they say to you? I don't want you briefing thin thread to anyone anymore. Something. That's
right. Yep. No, that's exactly what he said. That was a former vice president of SAIC they brought in to take over all the when I didn't finish the story about the NSA Transformation Office and that offer of $1.2 billion.
Sure, go ahead.
That they gave him. Well, what happened after that was that they started briefing downtown that this was a great idea, that we'll move quickly with this and solve the problem. Well, the first thing that Hayden did was to fire the guy who in charge of the NTO and bring in a vice president of SAIC to manage it properly. That is, to get it funneled into spending all this money. See, because the guy at the NTO at the time was saying that this is really, we already have a solution, this is really great, we're going to deploy this, and we'll work on making it better, right? That's what he was basically saying. But that wasn't the acceptable line, and that wasn't the route that Hayden and others at the NSA wanted to take, because it didn't support spending an awful lot of money. And so he was fired. And then they brought in an SAIC vice president. They hired him directly in to manage all as a government employee. This is what I mean about this incestuous relationship. So he hired him directly in to take over the NTO. And when he did that, of course, that's what he said to me. I don't want you briefing thin thread to anybody ever again, so just stop it. And so that meant then, of course, that SAIC got some really large chunks of contracts out of the Trailblazer program right up front. They were the prime contractor, I believe, for Trailblazer right up at the beginning.
Here you have someone that has recognized success, has recognized a solution, and for financial gain, someone actually telling you, hush.
Yeah, that's right. That's
unbelievable. It's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's the way it works.
So this really is what you mentioned a second ago. I mean, this really is culture of, in quotes, the forces of evil. The quote that you said, keep the problem going so the money keeps flowing. That's sad.
Yes, it is. Well, and the problem is that we are the ones that the people of the country are the ones who pay for that kind of decision making.
Mm-hmm.
And you pay for it by dying or being injured or other kinds of terrible things. Loss of property, loss of, freedoms. So we're the ones paying for that.
Yeah. I'm going to ask for your opinion here. Do you think that this culture is still there in the NSA? I mean, do you suspect that maybe?
That's absolute. Yeah, absolutely. Over there, to stop all these leaks and everything, they've started a program of see something, say something internally with your the people you're working with. So as you're working in the office, if you see something, you're supposed to say something to security. Well, I mean, this is like East Germany. This is what the Stasi did to the East German population. They had portions of the population watching all others and reporting to them. Well, that's exactly what they're doing here.
To get back to that, the notion of the culture, I guess they're advocating or they're rewarding no creativity, no innovation, no problem solving. We don't want the problem to go away, because if the problem goes away, well, then that cuts off the funding, that lowers the budget, blah, 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 right?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. Now, experiencing all this by, I guess it was July of 2001, you had enough, and you announced your retirement, right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I told both Maureen Baginski and Bill Black, Bill Black was the deputy director of NSA, and Maureen was the SID director. She was like the third ranking person. That was the second and third ranking person for the agency. I told them I was leaving. I didn't tell them why, because they were a part of the problem,
Yeah.
So I didn't predict. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt. I didn't mean.
Well, I meant they were the ones helping. They were the ones advocating with this policy and supporting it. So I mean, they were ingrained in it. So I didn't really feel that I had to tell them what the reason was I was leaving. So.
Not long after that, we have that absolutely horrible day of 9/11. Given those events, did you reconsider retirement, or were you thinking about, hey, let's get back in the game here and fight the war on terror, or how were you feeling during that horrible ordeal?
Well, I thought that when that happened, that first of all they needed help to get it to address that issue. And so I thought, well, now would be another opportunity to push the already functioning program ThinThread which would immediately change the whole game plan. So I thought now was an opportunity after the crisis we just went through, all the murders, all in New York and in D.C., that would be good leverage to use to get them to implement something smart. But it turns out that after that they were as adamant as ever of not doing that, because again it would solve the problem. So we were back to the same issue, and it was hopeless at that point. So I said, hey. And then when they started spying on U.S. citizens, all of us, I just said, that's the end. I can't be here.
Now, now prior to 9/11, machinery had been set in motion to begin actively spying on every single American. Is that right?
I think they were planning on it before 9/11, yes, but they used 9/11 as the leverage to implement it.
I gotcha. Okay. I hope you don't mind if we kind of go back over just a little bit of things that I picked up from your other interviews. Talk about variety, volume, and velocity.
Yeah, those were the primary reasons why that they were saying that NSA was going deaf and blind, and they needed to have a lot more money to solve the problem. Well, volume simply meant the explosion of cell phone usage and of internet traffic, and the internet was spreading and ballooning, and the volume of communications on it was doubling, every couple of years or something, or every year or something like that. But anyway, it was on a very steep curve. It was going so fast and increasing that NSA wasn't capable of keeping up with it at the time, and that's what they called the volume problem. And variety meant, like you can do video or Skype or, that kind of thing, or you can send files or emails or chat, or you can, all kinds of things you can send, pictures and so on across the web. So that's kind of the variety of communications and relationships that people would interact in. And so velocity, of course, meant it went at the speed of light, so all this stuff and all varieties passing so quickly we can't keep up. That's the story to get more money. Well, when in fact we had solved that volume problem and the variety problem, we used commercially available things like QuickView Plus and things like that allowed you to look at all kinds of formats for $37 a copy, you know. So that's what we looked at, and that was what we used, because, well, why reinvent the software when it's commercially available for $37 a copy? You know, that's
absolutely.
I mean, so that we did a mixture of things. We used some commercial things.
How dare you be such a spendthrift?
Yeah, right. That's right. Well, yeah. We had certain objectives. We didn't have a lot of money to do this either. You know, we only spent a little over $3 million from scratch to do this. Mm-hmm. And then we had it fully functioning at 3 separate sites, 24 hours a day, for about a year and a half before we left. And we wanted to go in January. We were prepared to deploy to 18 different sites that were picked by the terrorist groups. I went down to the Terrorist Analysis Center and I said, give me the list of sites that produce information that is useful to you in analyzing terrorists anywhere in the world. And so they gave me 18 sites. And I said, okay, these are the places we're going to go. So in January of 2001, I proposed we go there and deploy that program ThinThread to those sites for a little over $9 million. And that would have hammered the terrorist problem from January of 2001 on.
Imagine, $1.2 billion is what they were offering you before, and you're doing it for $9 million. Incredible. I know there are different problems and stuff like that, but I'm just saying that just look at the comparison contrast there, you know?
Yeah. Well, it was the key was to bring all the skills necessary to solve the problem together in one place and have them all interact together so they all understand each other's problems, and then they can adjust accordingly and make it work quickly.
Let me ask you this question. This might be sensitive, so don't answer if it's a problem, but the telecoms, the telecommunications, how long have they been in bed with the intelligence community?
Since at least World War II, okay. With a program called Shamrock, and then later on in a program called Minaret at NSA. Shamrock goes back to World War II, whenever they were watching communication into and out of the United States, and they were using the Telex and Western Union, things like that. Those kinds of companies to keep track of all that data and pass it to NSA. And that was going on. Shamrock was running from World War II up through 1975, and then Minaret was running in the late 60s and early 70s under Nixon. That's the program where he put in place for NSA to monitor people who are opposing the Vietnam War or any other kinds of political enemies that he had on the list. And then as a part of that, paralleling that, in the FBI they had a COINTEL program, and in CIA they had CHAOS. All three were kind of coordinated programs going after different aspects of those particular people inside the United States.
So now, originally these programs began during a time of war because they were set in place to try and intercept any kind of espionage in the continental United States, and so they had them in place to try and make sure that to stop sabotage and that kind of thing in the continental United States with I guess against the Axis powers, Germany and Japan. Yep. And then they just never turned them off. They just kept them going, right? Okay. That's right. So
and of course now, I would also point out that Bush used the War Powers Act under the Article 2 of the Constitution to implement a lot of this stuff. Mm-hmm. But in order to, and people don't seem to pay too much attention to this because it's pretty fundamental. In order to use War Powers Act, you have to have war declared. And as far as I know, the only time Congress has ever declared war was in World War II. That was the last time. Since then, they have never declared war. So according to that, with no war, the president has no authority or authorization from Congress to implement any of the war powers that he has under the Article 2 of the Constitution.
Getting back to post 9/11 now, let's get a little bit closer to our time here. Now, Did they automatically use thin thread, or did they just go right with stellar wind? And if they did, well, could you talk about stellar wind? I mean, how did they start collecting data on everyone? What was the program that they used? Was it your outstanding program that respected Americans and the Constitution, or did they start something completely different?
No, they took the back end of thin thread, all the software from that, and used that, moved it over, put it on other machines, got rid of the privacy protections part of it, and also the monitoring part of it. They threw that out, and then started feeding all the domestic communication from the telecoms into it.
So we're talking everything: phone calls, faxes, texts, emails.
No, they didn't. Initially it just started with the phone calls, but it spread out. As Mark Klein, when he compromised the NSA room in the AT&T facility in San Francisco, room 621A, I believe it was, and with all the NARIS device, now they had a splitter or a Y connector, which basically duplicated the fiber lines, down two different paths. One would go the normal route, the other one would go into the NSA room where they would pass it through NARIS devices, which would reconstruct everything on those fiber lines and present it to NSA for storage. So when he exposed that was started in 2002. So in late 2001, they started with the phone material from the telecoms, the billing data, and or contact data that you get on your monthly statements, those kinds of things. Sure. And then in 2002, they started with some real content, and I assume they also started doing some digital recording of the phone network at that time, or they probably had some of that already going, and they just expanded it.
How many laws are we talking about here infringing upon? I mean, it's got to be like three or four, right?
It's actually more than that.
It's more.
Actually, it's the First, Fourth, and Fifth Amendments at a minimum. The First Amendment because it guarantees the right of free association. But if you pass all this data to NSA, they then know who you're associated with, so you no longer have that freedom. So it's a violation of the First Amendment, and it's the Fourth Amendment because they're invading your affairs. They're looking at your phone calls and also your emails and things like that, and that also gets into violation of the Fifth Amendment, which means you have the right not to testify against yourself, but by reading your emails, you in effect are testifying against yourself. So it's a violation of the Fifth Amendment. But beyond that, it violated the pen register law, which said if you're going to do this, you have to have a warrant. And warrants require, according to the Fourth Amendment, a specific name and a specific set of information you're after from that specifically named individual. That's the specificity of a warrant,
right,
as defined by the Fourth Amendment.
Probable cause supported by oath or affirmation. Yeah.
That's right.
Particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized.
Exactly. So that's a violation of that also. But then it gets in also to that, after the pen register law, it gets into the Electronic Privacy Act, Electronic Security Acts, and all of the laws governing the federal communications regulations covering the telecommunications companies. Because by doing that, that's why the telecoms had to get retroactive immunity because of all the crimes they were committing. I mean, they had to have that because they were being sued by so many people, in the courts, and they would have to pay, so because of all the crimes, they would have had to pay such heavy fines that they would have been bankrupt. And so therefore the government had to go in and give them retroactive immunity. They're also starting that down in D.C. now, trying to get a bill passed, and I'm sure they'll get it through somehow, to give retroactive immunity for the internet service providers under the PRISM program for the same reason. They're getting sued because they passed their customer data illegally to NSA without a specific warrant. And so therefore they're going to have to get retroactive immunity too.
Hold off on PRISM. Hold off on PRISM, Mr. Binney. We're almost there, but before we get there. Now, who authorized this? Who authorized these blatant violations? They had to get authorization, and then this program had to be reauthorized every 45 days, and then later every 90 days. Is that so?
Yeah, that's right. And the authorization was done in a very secretive way.
Okay.
I think Dick Cheney in Stephen Hayes' interview of him on the 10th anniversary of 9/11, he explained it pretty well. He said, well, he and George Bush and George Tenet and General Hayden got together and decided they were going to do this. And so
okay. And
they all got
the Attorney General had to be in on this too, no?
Yeah, they had. It was the Yu, who was the head of the OLC at the time, was the key player in the DOJ.
Okay.
You know, that's the office that was supposed to look at all the things that the government wants to do in a past, whether or not it's legal or not. Well, you used some really flawed judgment, and all in secret, of course, because if it got out, nobody would. I mean, it would be immediately challenged, and he couldn't defend it. So, but it was all done in secret, and then by Addington and Gonzalez, they all got together and did the legal part of it to frame it in such a way that they could try to sneak it through without getting challenged. And so, to keep Congress from getting interference and interfering with their process, they called it a covert program, which meant that they could limit it to the Gang of Eight, which is the chair and ranking members of the House and Senate Intelligence Committee and the majority and minority leaders of the House and Senate. But initially, they only briefed the four people, the chair and ranking members of the House and Senate Intelligence Committees. So that was all the people who knew about it up until early 2002, when they brought in Colleen Catelli, who I think that's the name. She was the senior judge on the FISA court. Excuse me.
Sure.
But she was the only one that was told, and of course she bought into it. I'm not sure that she understood what she signed up for, but or any of them. But they were keeping this all very secret and keeping all the documentation for justification of it very secret, because it just recently some of it has come out. I mean, it's just flawed logic all over the place, and violations of the Constitution and any number of laws at the time. And so what they tried to do over time in 2008 was to get first the retroactive immunity, and then also the FISA Amendments Act to allow them to try to get what they had been doing legalized. Up until that point, it was illegal, right? That's why all the people in the Department of Justice were ready to resign, because it was unconstitutional and illegal.
And they know it.
So, I mean, that's how they tried to manipulate Congress and dupe them basically into passing things. I don't think many of them knew what they were voting for.
Yeah.
And that's another problem. They don't read the damn legislation they pass judgment on. They should do that. I mean, and think about it. I mean, we need to. I mean, I basically have been saying publicly, I didn't think we could do any worse if we randomly picked from the phone book every 2 years. I mean, we can't do any worse than what we got.
That's right. That's something that William F. Buckley advocated. You take the first 100 names from any public phone book, and you'd have a rational group of people there that would do justice.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, you'd have the majority of them would know how to run a budget, and the majority of them would stay in a legal atmosphere. They would demand a legal atmosphere and a legal execution of the business of the state, right?
Yeah. This came to your attention, what was going on, and you, as someone that is a good man and is a virtuous man and wants to keep the dirty laundry in-house, you go to the House of Representatives about this, and you bring this to their attention, right? Now, how did they react?
Well, Diane Rourke was the person I took it to. She was the senior staffer who had the NSA account at the time. And of course, she reacted like it was that they can't do this. Of course, it's not constitutional, it's illegal, all that. And it was obvious. So she tried to do that, manage it internally, and so did we. We went to other members of Congress and we talked to them. We also went to the Department of Justice Inspector General's office, and also the Department of Defense's Inspector General. And they were the ones basically who gave up our names to the FBI, who said, these are the people you want to get, So, I mean, doing things, and that's why I have to laugh every time somebody like our Secretary of State or any of the other bozos down there in Congress say he needs to come back on the intelligence committees, primarily the ones who go down there and say that Snowden has to come back and face the music and be accountable. I said, well, you people need to do that too for what you've done, and you're not standing up and saying what you've done yet today. You're still trying to hide it. Like, for example, Clapper. Clapper came out the other day issuing this order saying, internally in the intelligence meeting, saying, no person currently involved in working for the intelligence community agencies or or former employees can talk about anything Snowden has released to the public. Well, I basically, for one, refuse to give up my First Amendment rights to talk about anything in the public domain just because Clapper said so. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, they're going to have to pass a law, and that's going to have to amend the Constitution. That's the way to do it. If they want to do that, amend the Constitution.
Briefly, what are your thoughts about the Patriot Act, specifically Section 215, and the National Defense Authorization Act? Both of these things passed under the guise of national security. Secret courts, things like that. Talk about that if you could.
Well, first of all, the Patriot Act and their Section 215 interpretation, this is what Senator Wyden and Udall have been talking about. They have a secret interpretation that allows them to take in the bulk telephone data about everyone in the United States. And they use Smith versus Maryland as one case of one person who they had probable cause to do it to, right? The Supreme Court said he had no right to privacy in that one case, and so they extrapolated that to everybody in the country. But in that case, they had probable cause that this person committed a crime. So what are they saying? They were all criminals, you know, that's the implication then. But they had to make a secret interpretation because the law, Section 215, says that they're authorized to investigate any information that is relevant to a terrorist investigation. Now, what they do is they interpret the word relevant to mean potentially relevant, which means, and they also interpret that to mean everything is potentially relevant, and so therefore they do everything. And that's the problem with it, that the law does not say that. Even Representative Sensenbrenner, who helped write that law, said we never intended you to be able to do this.
So specifically, it was intentioned to be narrow, and yet they make it
and focused. Yeah. Yeah. And so that's the problem. But see, they were doing all of this in secret and keeping their interpretation secret, and they were getting a secret court in secret to approve it. Yeah. And also, they got that secret court in secret to say it was constitutional. Well, I mean, first of all. They say they have all three branches of the government, first, second, and third articles. That is Congress, the administration, and the courts. Right. And so they say they have all three agreeing, but this FISA court is not an Article 3 court. It's housed in the 6th floor of the Department of Justice, and it only hears the government side of the story. It doesn't hear any competing views. Article 3 court is required different points of perspective on an issue, where then the court would make the issue, resolve the issue through its interpretation of how the law and the Constitution would apply to it. That's an Article 3 court. They're very careful when they say it. They say that the FISA court is staffed by Article 3 judges, but it's not an Article 3 court, it's an Article 2 court. Mm-hmm. So they don't have all three branches.
Yes.
And they certainly don't have, in a democracy, you know, you're supposed to be an informed public so you can make a decision. Well, all this has been happening in secret, and nobody has been informed of any of it. And certainly a lot of Congress haven't. That's why Representatives Amos and Conyers got that effort to almost unfund the NSA efforts last year, and they only lost by 12 votes. That's because that part of Congress is beginning to realize that they were being lied to and manipulated by the intelligence committees.
Yes.
So this is really, I mean, and then that's why, of course, and I keep pointing this out, that's why Nancy Pelosi, when she was Speaker of the House, said impeaching George Bush is off the table. That's because she was one of the first of the four people on those intelligence committees briefed into these programs in October of 2001.
She was complicit, yeah.
That's right.
She was part of it, yeah. Talk about, do you have anything more to say about that before I move forward?
Well, I think I got most of it.
Okay, great. Now, if you can, talk about the EFF lawsuit. What's going on with that?
Well, the EFF lawsuit, Jewel versus NSA, is basically challenging the constitutionality of NSA even collecting all this data to begin with.
Okay.
And that's the one that I signed a sworn affidavit for
Yes.
2 years ago, and it's still in court. They're still the government is still trying to fight it, right? They're still trying to. What they're doing is they're destroying the evidence as they're going along, and they're claiming to the court. They just submitted a motion to allow them to continue to destroy data, so that they won't harm the ability to perform national security activities. Because if they don't allow them to destroy data, they're going to harm national security. Now, the reason they built Bluffdale was so they could store all the data they wanted for tens or hundreds of years worth of data of basically everybody in the world. So if they can't store that data, for all the money that they put into storage, that's just absurd. What they're doing is duping the courts. They're attempting to dupe the courts and justify it with a false premise again. So if I were the judge, I would simply say, no, you have to keep that data. That's what's required in a court of law. But they're trying to do that. EFF is fighting that, and EFF's doing a good job, by the way, I think, and they're making trying to make a lot of things obvious to the court as to how they should rule. But I think the court is everybody seems to be acquiescing to this trumped up statement of everything for them is national security. That way they get to do anything they want. Well, I'm sorry, you don't get to destroy my constitutional rights and everybody's constitutional rights for national security. Our constitutional rights are national security.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear, Mr. Binney. Does this coincide, this EFF lawsuit, does this coincide with the complaint that you signed with the Department of Defense, the DOD, the IG, the Inspector General, about this financial corruption, or was that a different matter?
Well, it's all part of it. It's all connected to it. All those programs and the finance and the money to support doing those kinds of things. Yeah, it's all really connected.
Okay. Now, talk about the infamous FBI raid on your private home shortly after Gonzalez's testimony. Talk about that, if you would.
Yeah, that was the key. It was the morning of the second day after Gonzalez testified to the Senate Judiciary Committee on the supposed terrorist surveillance program, where he only talked about the warrantless wiretap that was exposed in the New York Times. And that was only a very small part of the program. I mean, he didn't talk about the massive acquisition of email content or the massive acquisition of information on phone calls and recording phone calls and any of that. He didn't talk about any of that. So, and he, of course, knew that we had a good idea what was going on, fairly good idea on the scope and magnitude of it. So he didn't want us talking to the Senate Judiciary Committee, because we had a track record of talking to Congress and committee members. So in order to intimidate us and keep us quiet, he sent the FBI to raid us. He and the White House and NSA were the key components advocating the raid. So they were the ones who prompted it, and the FBI, of course, saluted and went along doing that. So when they got to my place, they came in, and then first time I knew they were in my house, the guy was pointing a gun at me as I was coming out of the shower. So that's how I found out.
That's a fine how do you do?
Yes, it is. Yeah, at the end of a barrel, I'm coming out of the shower saying, it was hard for me to understand what was going on, but I started to quickly understand, and I started getting mad at these people. Because they were no more than yo-yos following this. Who's pulling your string, you know? You're going up and down just doing their job and their duty. And so I accused them of that, of being sent here by somebody outside the FBI. And the agents that were around me that weren't leading the raid kind of backed up. So, you know, it's like their body language is telling you like you just caught them with their hand in the cookie jar, you know? So you knew you hit it right on the head. And the only thing the head agent, Paul Marek, could say was, we are not cat's paws for anybody. Well, that was a lie too. Of course, he's just following orders, that's the same claim that the Nazis made in the Nuremberg trials. So that was the other part too. I mean, with the NDA, I didn't mention the NDA. That NDA, National Defense Authorization Act, that's been passed, and Obama signed it. In its Section 1021, gives the president the right to declare somebody a terrorist threat and have the military take them off the street, even inside the United States, incarcerate them indefinitely, and give them no due process as a part of it. And so I liken that directly to Special Order 48 issued by the Nazis in 1933 after the Reichstag fire.
Sure.
And they used that order to take all the communists and any of the political opponents off the street and anybody else they didn't like and put them into concentration camps. So, I mean, we're following a predictable path here. This predictable path is how humans have done and tried to create totalitarian states down through history.
Definitely unsettling events.
Yeah, that's right.
One thing that you said in one of your interviews, I thought this was beautifully put. You talked about how that special agent, the FBI special agent that was leading the raid, how you were talking to him on your back porch, and you shamed him with the truth, didn't you?
Yeah, I basically he said he wanted me to tell him something that would implicate somebody in a crime. Well, you know, that required me to first think about what the crime was that I'm supposed to be reporting, and secondly, find some evidence that would implicate somebody in that crime. So I couldn't think of anything at the time, and I said that, and then he said, "Well, I think you're lying to me." And I was mad at these people to begin with, and then he says that, and then I said, "Okay, here's the crime I know about." I said, George Bush, Dick Cheney, Hayden, and Tenet got together and decided they were going to subvert the constitutional rights of everybody in the United States. And here's how they're doing it. I explained Stellar Wind, the program, the data they were taking in, what they were doing with it, everything on my back porch. And while I was doing this, the only thing that this guy, Paul Marek, the senior, the special agent in charge there, could do, the only thing he could do was look at the floor as I was doing this, because all the rest of the agents weren't cleared for this program. So they're getting an earful on a program they're not even supposed to know about. But it's a crime, and I was reporting a crime. Those people are required by law to investigate that report, and they did not.
Oh, my gosh. So you presented them with information of a crime, and they have neglected their responsibility and their oath of office that they made to protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. They've walked away, apparently, from that solemn oath that they took, yes?
Yes, and they were culpable in the cover-up of the crimes. That's the point. As the Department of Justice was, too.
Now, can I ask you this question? In your opinion, why are so many in our government apparently walking away from that solemn oath? What is it? Why? Why?
I think after a while, after you get, I think it's fundamentally due to not having term limits, because what happens when you get career politicians that are in there, they just start to think that their ideas and their thoughts are really the cream of the crop. That's like the top thinking. You know, obviously this is the way we have to go, because I really know what's good for everybody. And so when you do that, and your ego gets away from you in that fashion, you lose sight of the basic principles of the rights of human rights. And when you do that and lose that, then anything, just about anything goes, and you can do anything you want and excuse it for whatever reason you want. And that's what's going on here. Hello?
Yeah, Mr. Binney, I beg your pardon.
Okay.
We got cut off there.
I thought we did, yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I wanted to. Yeah, I wanted to say we have been talking for an hour and almost 10 minutes here. How you doing? You okay?
I'm doing fine. Yeah.
You're doing fine. Okay. Now, they weren't done coming after you, were they? This little raid to kind of like intimidate you, that wasn't enough. Now they had to trump up some charges and allege some kind of phony conspiracy about some Turf Valley Club meeting. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, what they did was they tried 3 different times to threaten us with prosecution. The first 2 times they'd passed it to our lawyer and said they basically told our lawyer that they were thinking about indicting us on certain charge, like taking intellectual property out and things like that. Well, we had documentation and other evidence that we could counter that. Immediately we told our lawyer, and he told them, and they dropped that. But then the third time they tried it, they simply decided they were going to indict us, and they told our lawyer that they were going to indict us. And then he told us what it was about, and he said it's a conspiracy charge for a meeting you had at the Turk Valley Club. Well, at the same time, I had retrieved all the data relevant to that meeting, because there were other people at the meeting that they never even talked to, by the way. So they were people they weren't the FBI, NSA, and the DOJ were not targeting, so they didn't particularly care to have their input. Okay, so that was part of the evidence of malicious prosecution, because those people could have clearly testified what went on at that meeting. We were attempting to put together a coalition or a little company that would attack Medicare and Medicaid fraud. And we were designing the ways to do that and creating slides and ideas of how we would organize that and make that happen at that Turk Valley Club. And those slides that we'd created, the FBI had copies of them. When they raided our place, they took them. So if you know Microsoft dates and times when you create files, the original, and so when you go in if you call up the file, look in properties, you can look down and see the date and time the file was formed. And that's when we were at the Turk Valley Club. Well, that was direct evidence that the FBI had about what we were doing there. They also had our emails talking about the agenda and who was involved in that and all that. And they didn't talk to everybody who was involved, nor did they pay any attention to the agenda. They just thought they had all the exculpatory data and could charge us with a conspiracy and try to make it stick with what evidence they had control of. So they would suppress any of the exculpatory stuff. Well, we had other people who were there. They also had the data, and they gave it back to us. So we had it all too. So when they were told our lawyer that they were going to charge us on a conspiracy charge for that meeting at the Turk Valley Club, well, I felt I had all this data, and I pulled it all together, and I said, well, okay, I'm going to tell them what I'm going to do in court. And so I wanted to let them know what I was about to do. Mm-hmm. So in order to do that, I called Tom Drake, because I knew his phone was tapped by the FBI. And so I read across, I said, Tom, they're planning on indicting us all. That's what our lawyer's telling us. And so here's all the data that I had. It's exculpatory. It's also evidence of malicious prosecution. You need to tell your lawyer, and we'll make this charge against them when we go to court. And I just said, I read off all the evidence I had. Well, after I did that, a month later, we get letters of immunity.
Wow.
So, that's because, they didn't want to be exposed to malicious prosecution.
That's right. Yeah. Of fabricating evidence, really.
That's a felony, by the way.
Yeah, that's not good, folks, if they...
Well, that's what they're doing now. With
absolutely brilliant strategy, man. Using their own bugged line to communicate.
Well, I wanted to make sure that I wanted to make sure the FBI gophers got something to go for,
Sure, absolutely. Okay, now I want you to do something now. Now you've just laid out an awful lot there. I want you to do something for me. I want you to compare and contrast yourself with Edward Snowden and the prison program, if you would. Hello.
Well, I didn't know about the prison program, although you could assume that the companies were participating in one form or another. That would be an assumption on my part, but he exposed the prison program. What I was talking about was on one slide there, and what he exposed, it showed the upstream program and the prison program. Okay. I was concerned more with the upstream program, because that's the near real-time fiber optic taps that they have around in the United States and around the world, so that's real-time acquisition of information. And it's content that they're pulling in as well. It's not just metadata. Don't believe that. That's content. That's what the nearest devices produce. They give them everything on the line, content and metadata.
For those folks in that might not be familiar with it, perhaps you could just explain briefly what a NARIS device does and is.
Okay. Well, there are two kinds of NARIS devices. The most efficient one is the one they're buying now, I'm sure. It's a NARIS Insight device. What that does is it will sessionize. That means take the packet data that's passed around on the Internet and take all those packets and reassemble it at the rate of 10 gigabits per second, which means if you envision it as all 1,000 character emails, one device, one insight device, could reassemble over 100 billion 1,000 character emails a day.
That's a lot.
That's almost the entire emailing process of the United States for sure. So just one device. But, they've got those things in at least 22 locations that I see or think of in the United States. Plus they have another 60 or so doing the telephone network, which means they're recording your telephone calls and also indexing them so they can be transcribed by phone numbers and priority lists that they have. I think David Murphy-Falk and Adrian Kinney, who were transcribers in Fort Gordon, Georgia, talked about that process and how it worked. So those two, that was the main thing I was talking about, that, not the PRISM program, because that was really my concern, because that's the real-time acquisition of content about everybody. And But Snowden, Edward, when he looked at it, he saw what happened to us, and he said this publicly in interviews, that he saw what happened to us, he saw what happened to Tom Drake, Chelsea Manning, and Julian Assange, and he saw all of the reactions of government and governments around the world to those kinds of activities. And he made his decision to expose this material, and so he devised his way, and basically it's probably the only way he could have done it, and stay in any way, any semblance of freedom, have any of that available to him, was to take the material just the way he did and go where he did and try to get asylum somewhere, much like Julian Assange did. So, but he's stuck in a small embassy.
Now, you're an advocate of Edward Snowden coming home, and taking them to the Supreme Court. Is that so?
Yeah, but I don't think now is the time to do that, because you couldn't get a fair trial now.
No.
I mean, what they would do is basically what they did to Tom Drake. You can't talk about relevant data, even if it's relevant to your case. You can't do that in the court, and that's what the limitations they put on him in that courtroom. They also said you can't talk about it in terms of specific names. They put substitute letters like, person A or person B, or topic X or paper Y. Yeah. Newspaper articles. All of that was kind of a substitute language that you had to use in the courtroom. Well, that's not a fair trial.
No, I suppose it wouldn't be. Let me ask you this. Why do you suppose Edward Snowden received such overwhelming attention by the media of communications while you were virtually ignored for years? Why is that?
Well, primarily because I didn't take any documentation of the facts that I was stating out. I just had my word, and the government was saying, the authoritative government was saying, we're not doing that, So I didn't have any documentation like Edward Snowden did. Okay. That's basically the difference.
Okay. I'll tell you a story. I have an acquaintance that, like yourself, 35-year retired member of the NSA. This guy went out and he got the bad guys, okay? On one occasion, he told me this. He told me that, and this is a quote, and I'm pretty sure it's verbatim. He said, "The information you receive is the information they want you to receive." Now, with that fundamental principle, why do you think Snowden has received such attention?
Primarily, you mean by the government?
Yeah. Why?
Yeah. Well, it's because they're trying to
by the media of communications, by everybody. Everyone's talking about everyone. Go ahead.
Yeah. There's two classes, I think, though, of that, right? One is the mainstream media that's really buying into the administrative narrative that try to characterize and do a character assassination ad hominem attack on him. And but the bloggers and the internet are the ones focusing on the issues that he raised by exposing that material. So there's really two narratives about him. One is and the government's trying to shift the narrative their way to make him a traitor, so they can apply they want to say he's associated with the Russian government. That way they have a foreign power, and therefore they could apply the Intelligence Act of 1917. where there's a foreign power involved, and you now have a spy, and now you can even execute the person. They were getting a lot of feedback and about what they were doing with that particular act, the Espionage Act of 1917, and applying it to whistleblowers. So they were getting a lot of crap about that. So they, with Snowden, they wanted to apply it, but in order to do it, they have to show a foreign connection. That's why they canceled his passport and kept stuck him in Moscow and said, he's there because the foreign power is Russia. They're setting their own argument so they can apply a law that they want to apply to him.
So basically, here you had a guy that had the goods, and they needed to do everything they could to destroy this individual in the eyes or in the minds of Americans. So it was just a character assassination on him as being traitorous to the goals of the war on terror, let's say. Is that fair?
That's right. Yep, that's fair. That's right.
Okay, now I want you to just consider this for just a second. Now, this is a lot. You're a good man, so I don't think you wouldn't even conceive this because you have a good mind, and I think you're a man of character and virtue. Let's say that you have a diabolical person out there. Okay, let's just say that fear is a powerful tool and can be used as a means of control. Do you suppose that perhaps the promotion of the Snowden story creates fear in the minds of everyone in the world? Fear of having those skeletons in the closet revealed, brought out for public ridicule and embarrassment. Any thoughts?
Well, yeah, that's what they're already doing that to some people in the Arab world. They're looking at their pornographic activities on the web and using that as leverage against them. Sure. That's what J. Edgar Hoover did, and I refer to this at the various times as J. Edgar Hoover on super steroids or the Stasi on super steroids, So all those people used information about individuals against them in one way or the other. And if for example, in the KGB case, if they couldn't get anything on you, but you had somebody you really cared about and they could get something on them, they would go after them as a way of influencing you. So that's an old KGB tactic too. So and that goes back through history. I mean, it's not unique to the KGB. So
one of the lectures that you gave, I don't recall where it was. You referred to this slippery slope towards totalitarianism, and I think you may have referred to it in our conversation earlier. Is the machinery in place already? Is it there in order to achieve this? And all that's left is simply throwing that switch. Is that where we are right now?
Yes, that's possible even right now. That's right. Because they've got, they're training the military for population control, and they're arming the police like the military, and they're structuring all that, and DHS is getting involved and doing that kind of thing too. Yeah. So, plus they've got all the information on everybody. And they've connected the FBI and the DEA, who are using this data to arrest people illegally, I might add. I didn't talk about that. They use it they use the NSA collected data to find bad guys, then go arrest them using that data, and then do a parallel construction to find the equivalent information that they could get through normal police procedures, and then substitute that for the NSA data when they take them to court. So they're basically perjuring themselves in court. So what that means to me is they have a planned program perjury policy run by the Department of Justice of the United States. And in fact, the Solicitor General of the United States lied to the Supreme Court in the case Amnesty International versus Clapper, that again was challenging the right of NSA having all this data. And they said in that case that the Solicitor General told the Supreme Court that if any of the data from NSA was used in a court case, that the defendant would be told. I mean, otherwise, that would be violating his rights to challenge the discovery of information against him, which is one of his rights in court. Well, that was a lie, okay? They have never told people that. So now the Solicitor General is scrambling, trying to find out how many cases and, trying to correct that issue, But this is how they've got it through. They've got it through by duping people in Congress and the courts, and also lying outright, and in Congress as well, and in the courts. So this is all a very ugly path we're on.
let's talk about solutions, Mr. Binney. I know one solution you mentioned was auditing. Now, isn't the NSA part of the executive branch and therefore cannot be audited, or am I off the mark here?
No, the only ones who cannot be audited are the intelligence agencies, NSA, CIA, the big ones, you know.
Okay, so
the rest of government can get audited. That's what the government accounting, the GAO does. They do an accounting of all of them.
Okay, so it cannot be audited because it's an intelligence.
They excluded it. Yeah, they excluded. I guess originally they said, well, this is such a secret operation, we have to exclude it from audit. When in fact all they have to do is get cleared people as auditors and bring them in to do an audit. That's all. I mean, but they refuse to do that. Well, that sets up the whole atmosphere of corruption, you know?
Certainly. Now, another solution that you had, vote the guys out of office, the guys that are career politicians, as part of the solution. Do you think that that's practical, given the control that they have over the whole process of elections?
Well, I mean, if enough of the public gets angry about this, I mean, certainly they could vote people out. I mean, they could vote for all the Tea Party people in the Republican side, and they could get Occupy group or a similar group on the Democratic side and vote for those people as opposed to the established politicians.
Yeah.
I mean, in either party, it doesn't matter which party it is. Both parties are doing this.
That's right. And that's the thing that I think most people don't get. Most people don't realize that most people don't realize that the two parties are two sides of the same coin, and that coin is in someone's pocket, I might add. But anyway, I'll take my tinfoil hat off now. But now, it's interesting to note about votes. In the late 1800s, there was a fellow by the name of William Magier Boss Tweed, and he was quoted as saying, "As long as I count the votes, what are they going to do about it?" Okay, now this guy was rigging elections in the late 1800s. I'm just like, with modern voting machines, with electronic ballots, I mean, you are someone that knows the vulnerability of computer technology. This is troubling, to say the least, as far as I'm concerned. Do you have any similar feelings? Yeah, it's especially troubling when you understand that through Bull Run and other kinds of programs that NSA runs, they're weakening all kinds of defensive systems, including firewalls and operating systems. And when you do that, I mean, you expose everything around the world to all kinds of hackers and other government activities. Other governments around the world can hack in. I mean, NSA has no monopoly on intelligent people. I mean, hackers around the world can crack into these things. So, I mean, everybody becomes more vulnerable because of that. So I refer to that as very short-sighted, finite thinking without any future thinking about the consequences and the unintended consequences that would occur because of that. Not just commercially, because of the systems being weakened, but also because of the vulnerability that people are under. A brilliant point that you made in another interview. You talked about the importance of communicating to the whole of Congress as opposed to just an elite small group of members of the Intelligence Committee. Could you flesh that out?
Yeah, well, the reason I was advocating that, and that's what we also put forth as one of the suggestions to the President and the whole of Congress, and also the EU, by the way, was that they have to have a body that would do the investigation to verify, have a verification process of what they were being told by the intelligence agencies. Also the administration. You would have a technical team of people who would go anywhere in the government on any system and have the clearances and access authority to go in and look at all their databases, all their processes, everything that they're doing and everything they're looking at to verify that what they're saying is true. That's the only way, because they have a consistent track record of lying to everybody, not just the public, but also Congress itself. And even the members in Congress are not telling the truth to one another. That is, the intelligence committees, instead of doing the job that they were formed up to do, that is monitoring the intelligence agencies to ensure that they do not spy on Americans. That came out of the Church Committee in the 70s. And the same is true for the FISA court. But all those, the committees in Congress and the court, the FISA court, are assisting NSA in doing domestic spying. Well, that's contrary to the charter that created them. I mean, and so you need a way of verifying. You have to have an absolute way of verifying and ensuring that no single group could suppress that knowledge once it's found out, right? So you have this technical team that can go anywhere, do anything, and verify it, but they'd have to come back and report to all of Congress and all of the courts, not just the Article 2 FISA court, but all the Article 3 courts also. So that they can't do like in the Jewell versus NSA or Amnesty International versus Clapper. They can't go into the courts and lie without getting caught.
Great stuff. Another great solution that you put forward was term limits for all public servants. You have guys there in serving in the Senate for like over 30 years.
Yeah, career politician, right?
Yeah,
right.
That's crazy. I mean, you've lost contact with the people that you're there to serve. I think this notion of public servant seems to have been lost. It seems as though that they've forgotten that fundamental, the role and function of their mission there as servant, I think has been lost. But we'll have to recoup that,
And I watched Porter Goss on, for example, on the Frontline program when he was talking about Diane Rourke discovering the program and telling her that she had to go talk to Hayden, and he was talking about Hayden about how well he could come down and explain something, and it made you want to just believe him and not question it. Well, I looked at that and I listened to that and I said, well, Porter Goss, you just lost the entire purpose of your existence on that committee. It is to question those agencies. It's not to simply accept what they say. So he lost his sight. He was corrupted right from the beginning. He lost his focus on what his purpose was in Congress.
This is the ultimate solution. This one that you talked about. You talked about character and integrity. You talked about that, and I think in that lies the real solution. I think we as a people here, everywhere, high and low, we need to return to virtue. Character and integrity mean something, okay? And, you also said this expression, a come to Jesus moment.
That's right.
I'm a religious person, so, I look at it, this is important, this is a very important thing, and I think we have really walked away from, any standard of virtue. And that's something that I think really needs to be brought back because it just touches everything. It touches every part of it.
That's exactly right. It is at the foundation of everything we do in this country.
Another thing, too, you mentioned the defunding of various spy agencies. Not the biggies, but I guess the superfluous or the unnecessary.
No, I actually meant them all.
Oh.
I wasn't distinguishing them. I meant them all.
Okay. All right. Very good.
That way they can't do this kind of thing because they can't afford it.
Sure. That's right. They can't. There would be no way to afford it, certainly. Now,
plus, I would also argue it would make them more efficient because they'd have to figure out how they could do their job with the limited funding,
Sure. Impossible.
So, as I think Clapper said at one point, I said, with the cutback in the defense spending, he said, now we're going to have to start to think, whereas before we just had a lot of money.
Yeah. That's right.
That's what they're supposed to be doing all the time, thinking,
Absolutely. Mr. Binney, do you have any final thoughts that you would like to impart to our listening audience? You've been with me here for about an hour and 34 minutes, and you've been very gracious with your time, and I thank you, and I'm sure the audience thanks you as well. But do you have anything more that you would like to share with us?
Well, just that we as a people, obviously our representatives aren't up to the task, but we as a people need to stand up and start insisting that we start getting back on the right path. This country used to be founded on, as we've discussed earlier, character and principle, and we had moral standing in the world. As a part of the last 14 years or 13 years or so on, we've been losing moral standing all around the world. How can we stand up and say we stand for things that are moral and just when we torture people or when we render people or when we, just randomly kill people with drones? That we are losing our standing, and obviously our representatives aren't going to correct it because they're a part of the problem. We, as a people, need to stand up and start really forcing the issue and forcing them to do the right thing. And if they won't, then get rid of them because they're worthless. I mean, they get in place for so long as career politicians, and they believe that the country owes them something. It's not public service anymore; it's service to them because they're granting us their wisdom, which is just fallacious. I mean, if they don't get the point, we the people need to just fire them. In fact, I've been arguing that we should hold a state's constitutional convention, which we can do under Article 5 of the Constitution. I keep all of Washington out of it. Get the states together and propose an amendment and also ratify it at the same time because the states would ratify it. And the amendment we could propose was that the states could collectively appoint a special prosecutor that would go after anybody in D.C. and get that and take that right outside of the Justice Department, which is currently corruptly controlled. If you take that responsibility out, that threatens everybody, including the Attorney General and the President.
Mr. Binney, I understand what you're saying. It sounds similar to Mark Levin's Liberty Amendments or something like that, the book that he just recently wrote. Now, with all respect to you, I think it's very dangerous. I'll tell you why. For one reason, I don't believe we are going to have control over those representatives that are sent there. And I suspect that, and I don't mean to be pessimistic, because I think at the heart of what you're saying and the intention of what you're saying, I think is a good one, because it's the intention to reform. But my real concern is that if first off, we have no control over the representatives that are going to go there unless they lay out which points they want to amend in the Constitution and none other, that you really do open up the possibility that they could just do away with the entire Bill of Rights altogether, and this would be this would be the venue by which they do away with the Bill of Rights altogether, and then they wouldn't even have to deal with all of the constitutional protections that they provide, and that's the danger, I think. And if you remember, I'm sure you're a student of history, but if you remember the Constitutional Convention, I guess it was Thomas Paine, he said, "I smell a rat." And he didn't even go. Yeah, he refused to go. Samuel Adams, I think the president of the Articles of Confederation, he saw the problem with this as well. So I warn you. I wouldn't. That. Yeah. Right.
I would say that state's constitutional convention would have to have a specifically defined agenda that would have to be set up before the states agreed to do that.
Yes.
And that would include specific amendments. Yeah.
Certainly. Yeah.
I mean, you couldn't do that. You couldn't go in.
Limits, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And you couldn't go in and say, that's right, term limits could be one of them, but you couldn't go in and just open with an open agenda. You would have to have a specifically defined set of amendments that you wouldn't want it to debate and approve or not.
Now, here's the other thing, too. Now, think about this for 1 second, okay? And this is just logic. If they are ignoring the present Constitution and they're ignoring present law, if we had this Constitutional Convention, what's to stop them from ignoring that as well? Do you see?
Well, you see, that's why I said we had to have a special prosecutor, and the power behind that would be the state troopers, the local police, and the state
sheriffs.
The sheriffs, and also the state National Guard.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
That would have to be that's a state's power. That would be the power behind the special prosecutor.
Okay.
You'd have to have that kind of commitment to that special prosecutor to make it function.
Mr. Binney, it has been an absolute pleasure and a delight speaking with you. At some future point, would you be gracious enough to share some more time with us if a subject matter comes up about intelligence that you might be willing to come back and talk with us?
Oh, sure, yeah, sure. I'd be glad to.
That'd be great. Well, listen, thanks ever so much for being here. Folks, you've been listening to Mr. William Binney, NSA, crypto-mathematician, member of the World Geopolitical and Military Analysis Reporting Group, senior official of NSA for nearly 40 years. It's been just an absolute delight speaking with you. God bless you. Good luck to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, take care now.
All right, bye-bye.